Let's go over to AI Detector. Let's go grab that camera. This is where we're configuring the zone. This is the analytic, not the AI. So bear that difference in mind. As we go through it, I'll explain better how the AI is different from the analytic, understanding of how they deploy and handshake with one another and become an effective tool in diminishing false positives. Track reference point. Track reference point means the center point, the focal point of the analytic. Is it going to start in the center of the object? Is it going to start at the bottom of the object? Is it going to start at the top, left, or right? So when you picture an object on screen, whatever it might be, person, vehicle, picture a bounding box around them. Yeah, it may be a square, it may be a rectangle, but that bounding box becomes your area of detection for the analytic. And so the center point for where the detection starts may be at the very center of that shape, or at the very bottom of that shape. Now, depending on what analytic you're going to deploy and what object you need to track, and again, now this comes down to the camera, based on the angle of view, you select where that center point or that reference point is going to be. If it's in some cases, you may want to track at the very bottom of that shape. Now, what that means is that wherever that point of reference is, that point of reference has to cross into your zone. If the point doesn't cross into your zone of detection, the analytic is not going to register an event. So let's say you have a person walking and the person's tracking reference point is at their head, at the top of that box. Their feet are the only thing that goes into that zone. Because the tracking point is at the top of the head itself is not seen to be within that zone, you will not get an alert. This is important to understand because this is a way to going in and minimizing your false positives, knowing where your track reference point is. So if we look at this blue box right here, that's the region of interest is what that's set up for. So anything within that region of interest is where we're going to see things. So I'll use this right now to try to demonstrate setting up the detection zone. So number criteria for determining an object in the area, I can say all points of a bounding box. So basically the corners of the bounding box become the points, the sides or edges of it become the box. But let's change it back to track reference. We'll keep it at centroid for right now. Number of consecutive frames for classification. So how many frames does the object have to be in before the AI box has recognized it? I can set it to 1 frame, but if the object's moving very quickly, it's not going to be in that frame for very long. And you really need about 1.5 seconds for something to be classified, recognized for what the object that it is. Basically, if it's going to be in 1 frame for less than 1.5 seconds, we're not going to be able to recognize it. So might it be in 2 to 3 frames for longer than 1.5? There we go. Maybe. You have to know your deployment. This is where sitting down and really seeing what's going on and kind of getting an understanding for how long something is in view is going to come into play. So in this case, the object moves pretty quick. I'm going to say it's going to take 3 frames. The object's going to have to be in 3 frames for more than 1.5 seconds to be recognized. I can turn around and I can say, all right, what's the minimum object size? So this is where you can start to deploy some mechanisms that will help you minimize those false positives. So I'm going to say I have a minimum object size and I have a maximum object size that I am interested in. And when we come down to the screen, I can see here's my minimum object size going by the vehicles that I have here. Let's just take that one and stretch it out. And I'm not going to make it perfect, just enough so that you kind of get the general idea. And then what's my maximum size? All right, let's bring this guy over here. So I'll stretch it out.
So by maximum object size, anything bigger than the box you're creating is not going to detect it?
Correct.
Let's say in theory, let's say, I don't know, a trailer passes by, right? And it's bigger than that box. It will not detect it.
It will detect it. It won't trigger off of it. So everything in screen, regardless of what settings you've put in there, it's being detected. The analytic, it's either on or it's off. The intelligence is to add filters, and this is part of where the AI comes into play. So right now, I'm still not playing with the AI. I'm still playing with just the analytics. So there goes your trailer. So what I'm basically telling the analytics right now is anything smaller than this, I don't want to know about. Do not alarm off of it. Anything bigger than this, I'm not interested in. Do not alarm off of it. But anything in between, I am interested in. Like going back to the earlier example of car lights coming across a parking lot. Car lights tend to be, if you're watching your video, kind of gotten a measure for the minimum and maximum length of those headlights that are being reflected off the ground. You can come in and you can use this minimum and maximum size to begin to filter out the majority of the headlights. I say it that way because, again, remember, 100% is not an option. It's just nothing is that good except the human eye and somebody sitting there going, okay, those are headlights. No artificial intelligence, basically. Good enough to cover all the nuances that a human being just has learned over their lifespan. Can I greatly reduce my false positives? Oh yeah, most definitely. I've got a parking lot like this. I get taillights, I get headlights at night, and those potentially create events. I can take these zones, I can set up a minimum zone. Anything smaller than this, I don't want to know about. Anything larger than this, don't tell me about it. It's not important. And this is where AI is going to come into play. And we're not there yet, but just to kind of give you that understanding. The AI is going to act as your eyes. The AI is looking at this image, and I'm telling the AI I'm only interested in people. If it's a vehicle, if it's anything other than a person, I don't want to know about it. So now what that's done is it's created a filter that basically tells me that when an object that is greater than a minimum size but smaller than the maximum size comes into this zone, and it is a person, alert me, generate the event. But if it is a vehicle, if it's other than a person, I don't want to know about it. It's not relevant. Now, that may not meet heavy deployment requirement. I mean, let's face it, if I drive onto a parking lot in my vehicle and the AI does not recognize me as a person because I'm inside my vehicle, you begin to see where the AI is not that intelligent in that statement. I can then take my vehicle and drive it through the front door. The owner is not going to get an alert from the AI because the criteria that the AI was looking for was not met. What was that criteria? A person, meaning they're walking or running in the scene, not inside a vehicle where the AI cannot determine that that's a person inside the vehicle.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that in that case, you would put both person and vehicle.
You begin to see where you really have to think about intent and purpose. What are you trying to do? What does the customer want to be notified about? The AI is powerful. It really is a powerful tool, but like any tool, it's only as good as the person deploying it. So the better hows and whys are understood, the better you can layer the AI. You can layer your tools and create a multi-layered intrusion zone. And I put it that way because what's your first layer of detection? Visual, your camera.
Yeah.
Your second layer is going to be motion detection. Hey, when motion happens, that's a layer of security. The next thing is to provide a zone that says, you know what, I'm only interested when motion happens within this zone. So now that's a third layer. Now I add a fourth layer, which is AI. The AI basically being, you know what, I'm only interested when motion happens in this zone, and the object creating the motion is a person. So now you've got 4 layers. Understand that what you are deploying is a multi-layer line of defense against somebody potentially with the intent of doing something wrong. The purpose and intent of the ad box is to help you create those layers so that at the end of the day, instead of 30% of the events that happen being relevant and being notified off of those, and the other 50 events not being relevant and being notified, the intent of the AI is to swing that around. 95%, 96% of the events that are relevant, you get notified about. And the majority of the false positives, you don't know about. You're not getting notified about because they're false positives. They don't matter. You've ruled them out by creating a multi-layer approach that has filtered out all the events that don't matter. A bird coming into the property, a cat coming onto the property, a dog coming onto the property. That's not something you got to worry about. But you're not worried about them going up into your car in the parking lot and damaging the car or stealing the car or going up to the building and breaking a window. Yeah. You're really concerned with people and the destructive potential that that person may or may not be bringing with them when they step into your property. So, okay, let's go back to this. So this is where we begin to add AI, maximum confidence threshold. I want to make sure that since it is a person, I'm going to start off, believe it or not, at 50%. Now, the reason why I say 50% is, again, different clothing, different shapes. Unfortunately, people don't come in a one-size-fits-all type of package.
Quick question, this threshold you're changing, minimum confidence, is that for that box that's highlighted? Can Can you click on each box and change the minimum confidence threshold?
It's related to the box, but it's also related to the AI recognizing what's behind the box. As we can see right here, just below, it may vary depending on lighting conditions, shooting angle, distance, and AI algorithm that is applied to this analytic. What we're saying is at some point we're going to apply artificial intelligence to filter on this. What we're looking for is a confidence level greater than this, that what's being seen and recognized in the scene is what we're looking for. Person, vehicle, whatever you may have set the analytic to. So at this point, we're saying I want to have a 51% confidence level that what I am seeing is, in this case, at this point right now, is 51% confidence level that the object is no smaller than this and no bigger than this. At that point, now what you're doing is, again, it's configuration over time. We know there's going to be variances. You adjust over time. You look at, all right, at 51%, what's the percentage of my false positives at that point? I've confidently reduced my false positives, but can I reduce them further? The answer may be yes. And honestly, in most times it is. But there are always going to be exceptions to that rule. At this point, you're observing the video, you're seeing what's causing the confidence levels to say yes. And you go, you know what? I'm getting 10 to 15% more items than I need to from the confidence level. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to tighten up my confidence level, let's say 65%.
In what instances would you use a lower confidence threshold?
You would only lower your confidence threshold if some of the objects that are not being armed, or I should say you're not being told about, you actually need to be told about. So let's say at 65% of the objects that are coming in view of this camera fall within, or I should say outside of, the minimum and maximum size requirements. So, this truck right here, we can tell is bigger than this zone. I need to be told that that truck's there. So there's two things I would need to do. One, I'd have to make my zone big enough that the truck falls within it, and then see what my percentage of recognition is. We can't see it from here, but there is a way to go on screen and see what the confidence level rating is. If that truck is falling below the 65%, maybe it's coming up at 63, then I'm going to roll my minimum confidence threshold from 65 down to 62. So that 63 and above, I'm now getting an alert on. Technically, 62% should be giving you an alert as well. There's always this overlap when you're right there on the line. So I tend to want to set it like slightly lower than the actual threshold that's being detected. Bear in mind, that percentage difference may lead to, instead of 96% accuracy, it may lead to a 94, maybe 93, just throwing numbers out there. To kind of give you an idea of the confidence, the accuracy may drop a little bit by that, but setting your expectations, what would you rather have? Would you rather have 95, or let's just say 90% of your notifications being ones that matter, or would you rather have 50% of the notifications that you get being ones that matter, and the other 50% being ones that are just wasting time and money? Obviously, you'd rather have the 90. The greater the accuracy of positive detection, the lower the cost in time and money, let's be honest. If you go from 96 down to 93, it's a 3%, which might mean one or two extra detections that are not relevant. Well, if you've already started with 100 notifications that aren't relevant and you've been able to whittle that down to a handful, you're already meeting the goal. The thing to watch out for is what I call nitpicking. And I call it nitpicking because when you look at what the original problem was and how much of that problem we've resolved, and then the nitpick is to try to get that extra percentage, stop. I'll be honest, don't try to get that extra percentage, because I've seen it go completely in the wrong direction. Try to get the highest average percentage that you can, and if you see that 1% and you think you can get that 1%, step back for a moment, take a breather, and really analyze and see if it makes a difference.
Can you give a quick example real quick of where we change the threshold? We can see in the live view
Let me scroll this down, and we'll go to live view and see if we can get that information. Just make sure that that's saved. Let's go to live.
And
There we go. We'll see if we get any. Right now, everything's static. Basically, what you would see is you would see a bounding box around the object, and there'd be a percentage above that object.
Okay. So there was 3 objects. Would there be a bounding box around all 3 showing the percentage?
It's a yes or no answer. I might have 3 objects that are very closely grouped, and the analytic may detect them as one object, in which case you'd still get that percentage next to it. But if they're far enough apart, which for the AI to determine that they are 3 individual objects. And I say it that way because, again, accounting for camera angle and lighting and everything else. Not seeing any bounding box on this guy. Let me go into the VMS and see if I'm getting it there, because we haven't really fully set this up. We're just really at the beginning and don't really have the AI and everything on it. So seeing our percentages, we may not see here. Yeah, we're not getting a bounding box around him because he's smaller than the car.
So does that mean like the reason why we didn't catch that person leaving that silver SUV was because the percentage level was too high?
Well, no, he's smaller than the car. Remember that zone that we set up around this car right
the
there?
minimum object.
He didn't meet the minimum object size. So let me go to different camera because I should have it set up here, this hallway. Let's go back to playback. See how it says person, 68%? And you can see that's the point, is center point right there.
So the minimum object size, that would be, it differs,
Well,
I guess, the distance from the camera.
Well, the minimum and maximum aren't set up on this camera. So bear in mind, when the camera we were just on was the one in the parking lot. So when you're setting the analytics up, it's specific to each channel. So it's not copied across all the channels. You manually go from channel to channel and set that up. See this right here? AI detector tracker settings, copy 2.
Yeah.
So again, if I have similar views, I can turn around and take in what I've set up here and copy it to my other channels. So it's a time saver. If I don't have apples to apples, it's not a feature that's going to be helpful. Again, it's a yes and no answer because there are ways to utilize it and there are ways not to utilize it, and it really depends on that deployment. The biggest thing is to look at this and realize there are tools that I can utilize, and these tools can do this for me and they can do that for me.
So the person who just got out the door, it's not detecting them right now. Well, it is, but it's not sending an event.
It's not alarming on them because if you look at the size, the minimum size right here, well, that person's a lot smaller than that.
So is that minimum object size differs within the distance of the person in the camera? So let's say the person's far away from the camera, but the camera still picks it up. Is it still judging it based on the object size you put? See this person right here?
Again, bear in mind from a visual, somebody standing 50 feet from you is going to be a much smaller object.
Yeah.
And somebody standing 5 feet from you is going to be a much larger object.
Right.
And that is the intent of minimum and maximum size.
So in this case, you would want a smaller box because you want to detect those people.
Yes and no. Right now, we're detecting vehicles. Person doesn't matter.
Okay.
But if your intent is people, then you turn around and you create a box minimum size that's relevant to the person's minimum size at distance of detection required. And I put it that way because you might have, again, let's just say you have that 50-foot parking lot, but the person doesn't really matter until they get closer to that sidewalk or they get closer to that building. So at what point are they large enough that you want to create that minimum detection size to begin the alert process? And at what point are they larger than required to stop the detection process? And that might not, larger is, again, it's a perspective thing. There's a person on my property and they're 5 inches from my camera. Well, they're going to be pretty big. I want to know. I've got a person, my property only extends 20 feet, and that person is 22 feet away from my property. Depending on my security approach, I may have a green, yellow, and red zone. So green zone, somebody's being detected in it, some objects being detected in it, I don't care about. I've created that zone simply so that visually I know anything there I don't care about. That green zone may be the main road. The yellow zone is where I want to be notified that somebody's on my property, but I want to know that it's not an emergency. It doesn't require immediate response. It just requires that I have an awareness. So that parking lot that we're looking at right now, I might make the parking lot yellow. That's just one big yellow zone. Somebody's there. I'm not worried about it, but I'm aware of it. But that sidewalk becomes my red zone, and where the bushes are become my red zone. Because at that point, they're close enough to my building that within moments, they could cause damage. To go from the front of this car right here to here, basically, it's going to take a person less than a second to bolt across. So if I'm standing here in the yellow zone, to go from this yellow zone, as you saw, there's a door over here, to bolt across this sidewalk and to that door, I guarantee you that a criminal can do it in less than a second. Is my red zone wide enough at that point becomes the question. And that's a deployment question, really. That's really how am I configuring my zones? But if I'm not aware that they're on my property, I'm not even going to have a chance to react if they get to that red zone. Right. I don't want to be notified when they get into red. I want to be notified when they're in the yellow, so I'm aware. And if I see them get into the red, I want alarms and everything else going off. That's when I want security to be on site. If they're in the yellow zone, I want security to be aware and for security to go, you know what? We're not worried, but to reduce our response time, I'm going to head in that direction. And should this go from a cursory awareness to a red hot alert, I'm going to be able to react a lot faster because of it. Stepping back for a moment, like I said, we're right now zoned for cars. But if I want to zone for people, set my zones, my minimum zone requirement, so that when it is a person coming on the scene, they're larger than my minimum zone, but they're smaller than my maximum zone, and now I'm going to detect them. I have no AI deployed at this point, so there's no AI filter. I'm just detecting objects. So at this point, person or car on property, they're going to start being monitored, and there's going to be a threshold to it. So while we're here, let's add an exclusion zone. Our exclusion zone basically says anything in this zone I don't want to be notified about.
So if the exclusion zone, would you need a set exclusion zone if that is outside of the zone you set up? Let's say the blue square you have, which is the zone you're looking for. Would you need to set up an exclusion zone for the road, even though the road is not in your blue zone?
You might, and I'll explain why. Depending on the vehicle that comes across that zone, if that vehicle falls between my minimum and maximum size restrictions or thresholds, then I could see a bounding box go across it and it could be tracked. Now, what does that mean? It's an impact on my resources. It's a potential distraction from what is important to me, and that is my property versus the main road. If I want to minimize and focus my AIs, kind of put it in a very loose inference, because you're focusing your AI based off of the zones and stuff that you set up. But I only want my AI to really pay attention to my property. To help minimize AI resources, I'm just going to create this zone here
on everything that's outside your property, because you don't want to see that anyway.
Exactly. Now, all because I can doesn't necessarily mean I have to. Again, this is where like doing a 48-hour to a 1-week burn-in period. You've deployed your device and you want to make sure that you are minimizing any influence that could generate a false positive. So if I deploy for this scene and I come back a couple of days later and I realize that I'm getting 3 alerts a week because of an object coming across my screen in that area, I don't care about that area. But those 3 false positives become a distraction of my resources as the owner. Exclusion zone. Now those 3 notifications a week that I don't care about and aren't relevant to my intent are no longer being generated. Now think about that. That's 3 notifications a week. Well, if you figure 4.5 weeks in a month, you can see how
12.
those
that goes it.
Like I said, that single percentage may not make a difference. It really requires sitting down, understanding hows and whys, but really looking at what's generating the information that you don't want and going, okay, is there a way for me to successfully remove that information or successfully diminish it from impacting what is important? In this scene, I can say yes. I can throw down an exclusion zone that ignores everything that's there that's not relevant to my property, and I can successfully reduce those 3 notifications a week and be happier by the end of the month. All right, so I'm gonna save what I just did. We're just using this again. We're using this as our channel of representation, and let's get to an AI.